Hello everyone and welcome. This is Smitty of Old Smitty Gaming and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to kick off our KSM guide, starting with the Protection Paladin. I recently earned KSM on a good push week, I think it was a couple weeks ago. Before we get too far ahead, if you haven't already followed me, be sure to check out in the description below a link to my Twitch channel. Alright, so let's get started first with talking about life of an off-meta tank. So Protection Paladin, as you know, really isn't meta as Vengeance Demon Hunter and even some emergence of Guardian Druid has really come out. So with that being said, if you're thinking about switching to Protection Paladin, there are some good strengths and weaknesses. We'll get to that in just a second. But consider that it's going to be hard getting invited. I actually ended up earning KSM by building and pushing my own keys. So just keep that in mind if you're thinking about switching. There are a few very key strengths to Protection Paladin, however, in the Mythic Plus scene. One is they have an insane amount of utility. So that comes in the forms of Bubble, Blessing of Protection, your Blessing of Sacrifice, Freedom. Even you could play, I call it a carry tank, and we'll get into talents and stuff later, but you can also be pretty much an off healer, or in some cases, the top healer. They also do big burst damage. It's insane, especially with Divine Toll. We'll get into Covenants and Soul Conduits later, but Divine Toll hits like a truck. There's been some pulls like after Pride where I'm topping out 60 or 70k, so it's huge damage. They have great self-sustain. That's the one really nice thing. As long as you can survive, you can pretty much survive forever for the most part, with just the ability to heal yourself and rotation of defensives. Also, another thing I consider really strong for the Prot Paladin is one of their talents for Divine Shield lets you taunt everybody, and for 8 seconds you're basically immune to all damage. So it really allows you to tank and group some things for some really crazy pulls and avoid things that would potentially one-shot you. And also, it's kind of a get out of jail free card. Some weaknesses include we're not the most mobile compared to other classes. You have to be really conscious of when you need to start kiting, because if you wait too long, your ass is grass. you're gonna get you're gonna get screwed over. So you got to kind of get out before it's too late, because a lot of times when you're forcing out, or let's see it here, it's called Divine Steed. When you do that to get out, if you are basically in trouble, you're going to turn your back to the mobs and you're going to get popped. Also, without defensives, you basically fall over. So I'm going to tell you how to get around that a little bit, and a lot of that involves kiting a little bit later in this video. All right, so let's get right into it. Let's go into some of the builds that I use, the talents, and what is viable. So if we start here, I almost always run Holy Shield just to get the increased block chance and, more importantly, the ability to block spells. Sometimes you can use Blessed Hammer. I see this used sometimes in Fortified Weeks. The nice thing about it is when the enemies you hit with it deal less damage to you. However, personally, I still prefer Holy Shield on every week. In the second row, I always take First Avenger, and I think that's because it pairs extremely well with the legendary that I'm using and Divine Toll. Basically what this does is your Avenger shield hits additional targets, and you get an Absorb shield for it. The next row is, you can pretty much pick any of these, and I'll tell you why I pick what I do. I play Blinding Light. Basically, it's like a Dragon's Breath from a mage, but every minute and a half. But it's super nice for interrupting things that effectively might only be stunnable. So you can, if your stun's on cooldown, you can pop that. Or if there are multiple casts going off, like if you're in Necrotic Wake and you're in one of those packs where they have the double drain fluids, you can be a savior there and double blinding light those guys. In this Fourth row here, I actually prefer to play Unbreakable Spirit. Reduce the cooldown of your Divine Shield, Ardent Defender, and Lay on Hands by 30%. That's pretty big actually, especially if you're running Final Stand here, because Final Stand makes you immune and targets everything. So you get 30% DR on that, or a time off of that, along with your Ardent Defender, which is your most commonly used defensive here. Which this is actually pretty important, and there's another way to reduce that time as well. In this row here, I prefer to play Divine Purpose, just for getting out more Shield of the Righteous, or in some cases, Word of Glory to pop me back up. A good scenario. The nice thing about it too is when you get this proc, it increases the damage or healing by 20% of the Shield of Righteous or the Word of Glory. So what I really like to do, like once you get to high stacks on a Pride, is to start self-healing myself, takes the pressure off the healer so it can heal the other members of the party. Next, this is kind of in a bigger key. I'm always playing Consecrated Ground because this is what allows me to kite. However, if you're super outgeared and you're just trying to carry your friends, I think Handed Protector might be better if you don't have any need for getting away from the mobs. This is super nice because your Word of Glory also works off your party's missing health instead of only yours. So there's been lots of times when I've run this and I basically full heal in one Word of Glory a teammate that's about to die. The last row, I prefer Final Stand almost always, especially on fort weeks. The big thing with this one is it allows you to do some really crazy pulls because you're immune, and it's a really nice get out of jail free card, and it's an additional defensive. So you go from only having your Ancient Kings and Ardent Defender to having a third in that Final Stand, which, like I said, pairs really well with Unbreakable Spirit, so you have it more often. Another option is Righteous Protector, and I think this is actually really well for does really well for a damage build when you're wanting to max damage. However, in most keys, you're going to be running half the time anyway. So you really want, I don't know. I like taking this sometimes in Torghast, but outside of that, for in the N plus scene, I haven't ran it. I don't really run it in any keys above the 10 level. All right. So we can kind of move on from that and go into Covenants and Soulbinds. I have primarily played Kyrian, and I'll tell you why. Because Divine Toll is incredible. Instantly cast Holy Shock, Vengeance Shield, or Judgment on up to 5 targets within 30 yards. Okay, so when you run this first Avenger talent and your Avenger Shield's hitting 2 additional targets, so you're sending 5 of those out. That's with the big burst. And you're getting a shield on that. And if that wasn't enough, Avenger's Shield also silences those 5 targets it hits. So this can be used like a defensive, which I use it that way in many cases to get the big absorb, burst damage, or even an AoE silence. It's pretty big. Some of the conduits I use, I do play the Pelagos tree, but I play Ring and Clarity to get additional for Divine Toll to hit more times on the primary target, and that's super nice just for the, it's like I said, it's huge damage. I run Shielding Words. It's just a nice generic one where in this endurance spot, I could probably run something a little better to make me a little tankier, but this actually really helps, like, especially in some of those high pressure situations where you're like healing as much as you can there. I mean, there's times where I'm healing for like 5 to 7k heals per second to survive a very difficult pack, and this just kind of like gives me a slight edge in that. Especially when you have wings, it's nothing to get like a 30k Word of Glory. Then you're taking 20% of that. That's pretty huge. On fort weeks in this slot, I like to run Vengeful Shock, which is your Avenger Shield causes targets to take 4.2% more holy damage, which is pretty big because your Shield of Righteous is holy damage, and the legendary I'm running increases the damage when you use Avenger Shield, so it's a kind of a wombo combo there. And I mentioned before reducing the cooldown on your Ardent Defender. This is how you do it. Shield of Righteous extends Ardent Defender's duration by 20% and reduces its cooldown by 1.4 seconds. So that's pretty big. Then lastly, you get your 3% uh, spell reduction effectively if you use different abilities. So if you don't use the same ability twice in a row. This is pretty much 100% uptime. I want to make some notable mentions. This Royal Decree could be pretty good. Guardian of Ancient Kings cooldown is reduced by 21 seconds. Casting it causes your next Word of Glory to cost no holy power. It's pretty good, but to me, it's not a ton of value, so I don't really run this one. But I will say, I think Punish the Guilty is the best potency, the second potency to run outside of, I think Ring Clarity is always the best, but this is really good for Tyrannical weeks. So basically, what you want to do is use your Judgment before your Shield of Righteous and after your Avenger Shield to get really big Shield of Righteous. It's just a little more damage. I also want to take note that Protection Paladins can also play Venthyr, and I think it's actually pretty good on Tyrannical. But however, with the current Covenant system not being able to interchange easily, I don't play it. And that's specifically because Divine Toll offers so many things, like I mentioned before. The AoE silence. You got your big defensive. You got your big damage. You got your big absorb. I mean, it's really, really tough to compete with that. All right, let's talk about rotation. And just a little, like, some of the inside workings of how Protection Paladin, like, how can you survive? So this is pretty big. Is you always want to keep your consecration down at all times. The big thing here is reduces all damage while inside your consecration by 4.3%. That's your Mastery Divine Bulwark. And that's really important because that's just a flat DR. And it's a four, like for me, it could be much better. I could get this down like 3.5 if I ran more haste gear. But basically, you're gonna be kiting with this. This is like 100% uptime. This is like one of the first things you want to drop. The rotation is pretty simple. When you're going into an AoE pack, you basically want to Avenger Shield. That's going to pretty much net you enough threat for quite a while. And you're going to, in most hierarchies, you can go in there, you're going to do as much as you can. You're going to Avenger Shield into Consecrate. If Divine Toll is up, you'll do that. And you pretty much have threat the rest of that pool, no problem. I like to use wings on cooldown effectively, unless I'm about to come up on a particular pool I know is very difficult. And wings can be used defensively as well because it increases your critical strike chance by 20% and increases your damage and healing. Your healing. That's the important part. Like, so you're in trouble, right? But you have your Avenging Wrath rolling, you're pretty much full healing yourself at low HP with Word of Glory. I won't get too much into some of these inner workings. I will say below 20%, you want to be using your Hammer of Wrath. It does a lot of damage and generates holy power. I say that you should be using Shield of the Righteous. You want to maintain that armor percent uptime. In my case, it grants me a little over 2,000 armor. However, I will say if you know you're about to engage in a dangerous pack, you need to hold some holy power for Word of Glory to pop yourself back up. And I'll get into some of that a little bit later when I talk specifically about some of these dungeons. Okay, stat priority. This is where a lot of the websites and myself, I kind of disagree. I think that a lot of sites tell you to play Haste Mastery, which Haste Mastery definitely is good. However, I think in bigger keys, I prefer Haste Verse. And as you can see here, I have 29.45% Verse. And the big thing about it, it does increase my damage by nearly 30%. But the important factor to me is it decreases damage taken by nearly 15%. So I got nearly 15% DR, and then I add my consecration. That's 19% flat damage gone. You keep your Shield of Righteous up, and that's basically when that's up, I'm about taking 60% reduced physical damage. So my goal was to be as tanky as possible to give my DPS the most opportunity to successfully time a key. I do have here some stat weights. Let's see here. I ran this a couple weeks ago when I just had recently obtained KSM. You see I'm at 216 item level. And the most important, now this is like DPS centric. So while this is a good tool, it may not be the best for simming how tanky you can be. This is pure damage. So they actually say crit mastery versus haste. But haste you want more of to use your abilities more often to generate holy power to pour more shield of the righteous and more word of glories. Like I said, you can probably play mastery and it still be really good. However, I think verse just given that flat DR is probably a bit better in my personal opinion. All right, now let's talk about macros and add-ons. I am a huge macro person. As you can see, there are not enough macro slots for me. So I do a lot of at mouse over macros, and what this allows me to do is without even actually targeting something to attack it using my ability. So you see I don't have this guy. See, now I have him targeted and I don't. So if I press my Avenger's shield while hovering him, the mouse over effectively, it will attack him. So that's really important to me. I also have some other macros specifically for the ones I'm using on my party. I'm also using mouse over with the help indicator on a lot of these. So that's your bop, your freedom, your cleanse toxins, things like that. Also, notably, on your big damage or healing cooldowns, I like to pair my trinkets with. So it's really simple of just saying, hey, this is my become super strong bar, and I actually have one on both of mine are on use, but this one is like a 20-second cooldown. I'll get into this later. Basically, what this does is just give me crit, which is not great. It just happens to be a lot of strength. When it comes to trinkets, I do think that you should be playing the cheat death trinket that comes off Sun King in Castle Nathria. And my personal preference is to also run the Stone Legion with hopes to help my party grant them more verse, but also the flat verse you get, like I said, really playing into my flat DR. That's pretty much it for the macros. I can go into more detail on that kind of thing in a later video. Let's talk about some of the add-ons I use. So one of the add-ons I use, and probably the one that I find to be the most important, is weak auras. And that's what you see in this location. I got my trinkets here. I got basically my spell HUD, if you will, and my Kyrian file. This is kind of what I'm tracking. This is going to show me my holy power, all that kind of thing. So holy power generation, all that kind of stuff. So it's really really important to me to have that kind of visibility. It shows my shield of the righteous uptime, things like that. It's got my defensives here, so it's a really like quick snap for me to see everything, where the cooldowns are at, and things like that. I do want to talk about a couple of other add-ons that I have, and one is threat plates, which I recently swapped back to. I was using, I think it was tidy plates, but I really like the big bar, and I'm actually using Bajira's code here, so or his template effectively, but it shows me my a really nice indicator of what's going on with these guys. So I could see I got my consecrate up, I got my judgment up, my Avengers Shield debuff is up, so I have really good visibility on that stuff. Okay. So the other, I think this is probably the second most important add-on for running Mythic Plus, and that's Mythic Dungeon Tools or Method Dungeon Tools. Excuse me, Mythic Dungeon Tools. Anyway, this is a super good add-on for just kind of mapping out what your run's going to look like, and it gives incredible detail on what every mob does, what count percent, and the nice thing is you can share this with your party members to effectively share your route so they kind of know what your pulls are going to be. This is actually going to be an incredible segue into working with MDT and understanding how each dungeon works, and so I'm gonna go over some of the like very dangerous pulls and how to handle them. So we can just start at the top here, and the other side is actually an incredible example because right out the gate you have two really difficult pulls, especially on like a 45-15. So what I like to do on this first pull on a fortified, your group should probably lust, so you don't have to survive that long in comparison to this pull. What I like to do is try to get away with just wings and ardent defender, where you can heal yourself a lot here, and you're going to have your divine toll to get a big shield right off the jump. And you can always kite after you get them down just a little bit, especially on a week like this week, Sanguine. You're going to be kiting anyway. But the big thing I want to stress is you don't want to blow everything here. You don't want to blow Ancient Kings. You don't want to blow Divine Shield if you don't have to. Because with all the DPS with Lust blowing their cooldowns here, that means this particular pack is going to take a long time. So this is another dangerous pull right here. So like I mentioned before, I like to save Ancient Kings and potentially Bubble. I like to Bubble pull this on Fort because it's actually a really big damage pack. Like I said, your DPS won't have cooldowns likely here. So just that will give you 8 seconds of immunity and kind of give your damage and healers enough time to keep you up. And as long as you keep this main mob, the Death Speaker, interrupted, it's not too dangerous. But Protection Paladin doesn't do particularly exceptionally well against magic damage, so you want to mitigate and interrupt as much of that as you can. Um, there's nothing like too crazy in any of these other wings. I will say that the Mechagon wing, the bosses, specifically the second one that comes down, I think it's this Maleficent Mana Storm. The blades are really important. That's another place where it's really important to play Kyrian because you can file that off, and you can also cancel bop off, which I have a weak aura for that as well. Not a weak aura, I'm sorry, a macro where you effectively cancel it. So what you can do, because when you do bop yourself, you're gonna lose threat. But if you press it really fast, it'll clear the dot, remove the bop, and you just immediately taunt. Should be good. Like you have to price it a little bit, but you'll get it. The boss in Ardenweald and some of the trash. Nothing super secret here. I like to get my 80% pride before I do the really big earn pull, which I think is really good because your damage will kind of hold off for that. And as long as you got big dam for that, you should be good. But I try to trigger my 80% pride here, and then I do a massive pull around that, and that's usually good. So what you want to do is I like to use like as little as possible to actually group them. So if I do it really well, I can only commit my Ardent Defender. And that's what you want to look for. Maybe Divine Toll for threat, Ardent Defender for survivability and Word of Glory. Then they're going to earn. So after that 8 seconds is up is when you're going to take the damage. So that's when I like to go into Ancient Kings and Divine Shield to help sustain that pull. That's a really difficult pull, especially this week on like a Sanguine week. If it's not brought down fairly even, then you just got stuff standing in there and you eventually will die. Let's move on. Halls as protection paladin, nothing particularly too hard here. I will say there are a couple packs. This pack here in specific with the 3 Gargans, and this pack before first boss just because of limited area to move. Basically, any of these Gargans on a fortified setting are going to be very difficult to handle, and like I've kind of alluded to before, I mean your Kyrian file is very strong here to remove that bleed effect, as well as doing the bop trick I mentioned before, and also using your divine shield. Miss Tyrannosai, really easy dungeon with the exception of these first couple pulls. The what I do here, these first 3 pulls are really difficult as a prop paladin, but what I like to do is delegate not add-on, but DPS cooldown usage by pack. So like if I have a fire mage, I'll let the fire mage go off on first because it'll be up again for third and for boss. But for players like that have 2-minute cooldowns, like Convoke for your boomies, your hunters, wild spirits, I prefer them to hold that for second pack because the second pack is far more dangerous. So typically what I would do here is no defensives on the first pull, maybe just Ardent Defender if I really need it. There's actually mainly just a bunch of group damage going out. But on the second pack is when I'm using my Bubble and Ancient Kings and everything else. Also, this pack is pretty difficult too, but you should be able to just blow up a cooldowns. Hopefully you got your Divine Toll back up for the AoE silence, get them grouped up, interrupt the, I think it's called Harvesting Essence, and you should be good to go here. Plague Ball, a 4 and Tyrannical Nightmare a lot of times. I will say I think 4 is a lot easier, especially if you can have a good usage of some of these Plague Borers. In this area, it's not too bad, but actually you do get a lot of value out of being a Protection Paladin in this particular dungeon. And I'll tell you why, because a lot of times there's a I think it's either a poison or a disease. I'm not sure. You have to correct me in the comment section below, but it slows you and by a lot. But what you can do, you can cleanse toxins as a protection paladin, and Blessing of Freedom is pretty huge here. So a lot of times you want to group these mobs around a plague boar about to explode. However, you don't want to explode, right? So it's pretty important for placement. Binding shots, stuns, and stuff. But to get yourself out of there, freedom is exceptionally good. So that is, I would say, one area where protection paladins, if played correctly, really thrive. Sanguine Depths, very difficult dungeon, but you do bring some utility with your Divine Tolls and AoE Silence, specifically on some of these more difficult packs that include these Oppressors and Grand Overseers. So that's really nice. And this is probably, I consider this would be one of the more difficult packs with the Brute and everything here. I think this is probably a pack where you want to target using your Divine Shield, especially considering you're going to proc your 20% pride prior to the boss. So if you're not, your group, if coordinated, should bring everything down pretty evenly. However, if they don't, you're going to be in real trouble if you're low going into that. So good defensive usage here is very important. I also want to talk about the, I think, yeah, this is the third boss here, Grand Proctor Burlia. I'm probably saying that wrong, but this one is an absolute tank buster. So my pro tip as a protection paladin is, I believe she casts something called Iron Spikes. Yes, so it's channeled and she basically wrecks you. So what I like to do is have a Word of Glory ready to go. And as soon as I see myself dip below 40 or 30%, pop back up, and you can survive it pretty much every time like that. Another great way to deal with it is just Ardent Defender or Blessing of Ancient Kings. I haven't done this on a 15 Tyrannical, but I imagine that you're probably going to need a defensive every time, but you mainly have three, but I would say you can pretty much squeeze out four in a row on each Iron Spike as long as you use Ardent Defender first and you're using the same setup to get the cooldown reduction on Ardent Defender. So you can Ardent Defender, Ancient Kings, and then Bubble, and then Ardent Defender again. And then you're pretty much going to have to coordinate with your healer to keep you up after that. So you can use SLT from a Shaman or Pain Set from a Disc Priest, or maybe some weird other stuff. I don't know if I've never really tried running from it. You might be able to just bop. Haven't really tried that because I don't want my melee getting one shot. Spires of Ascension. This one isn't too bad. I will say there's nothing like too terribly difficult here. The first boss on Tyrannical, you want to do your best to try to sidestep his frontal cone. It can be pretty challenging. It can be accomplished. It's difficult, however. This pack here is actually really, if you don't have something to get them out of stealth on a fort setting so you don't get one shot, you can preemptively bubble and run through to basically get them out of their stealth, which is actually super nice. All right, everybody's favorite, the Necrotic Wake. Nothing really too special here from a Paladin perspective. You are Kyrian, so you can activate these Goliaths, which is super nice for your team. So it's in this location, and this location. I don't typically pull this, but if you do this stuff fast enough, you'll have your Kyrian buddy up for this and for these packs. The real key to this dungeon is good use of armaments, really, and this is going to come down largely to your group because you can only carry a max of two. So if you're going to pull some of these more difficult pulls, like on a fort setting like Narzuda, it's really important to potentially use something here. At least I've noticed like pugging and stuff like that. Also, on a tyrannical setting, you're going to want to get pride onto a Marth, and it's not super difficult. I guess the most difficult part of this entire dungeon is the necropolis, and specifically because of these Kyrian stitchworks. This is a stackable debuff they put on you, Tenderize, and what it does is increases the physical damage you take by 12% all the way up to 48. There are ways of clearing this, like I mentioned, before, using the bop and then cancel aura on your bop, using divine shield. Typically, when I'm pulling these packs, I want to make sure my DPS set cooldowns anyway, or we just killed pride or something, especially on fort, because these guys have. It's been nerfed a couple times, I believe, but they still have a lot of HP. Let's move on to our last dungeon, Theater of Pain. This dungeon actually hits pretty hard, especially as a protection paladin. I actually would suggest on a fortified setting to never pull this 4-pack. 222 item level with nearly 30% burst, and it still completely wrecks me. I would suggest if you are going to do this, you have cooldowns for it, and your group strong enough to preemptively bubble, because sometimes you can nearly just get one shot starting this particular pack. Let's see some of this other more difficult. Some of these can be a little challenging. I'm not going to get too much into it. I will say that your AoE silence is exceptional for dealing with this particular hallway. So what you can do is, once you kind of get them grouped, because especially on fortified, once they start channeling, even if you get around the corner, they're still going to continue their channel. And it's probably going to nearly kill somebody by the time their channel ends. But what you can do is use your divine toll carrying ability to AoE silence these guys and make it a lot easier to work with. Also, another thing you can do, I believe they do slow you, so I try to throw out a freedom, and that really helps. Same thing on this other pull here. This is pretty self-explanatory, pretty easy. I must have, okay, Chamber of Conquest. These, I think, are the most difficult trash to deal with, these contenders, if you will. They truck, especially the guy, there's one of them, I think it's this one, maybe not, maybe it's, yeah, it's this guy. He colossal smashes you, causing you to take 50% increased physical damage for 10 seconds. If that lands on you, if you don't dodge, block, or parry that, your ass better have some Word of Glory saved up because you're going to be taking huge damage. At that point, you are basically a meat shield, so you need to not focus damage at all and make sure you are able to keep yourself up because he, on a 15 or higher 4 to 5, will be absolutely wrecking you. Well, lastly, very last thing I want to talk about are some of the different affixes you might have to deal with, and there are a lot of them. But let's first talk about Fort versus Tyrannical. I actually think Protection Paladin is better in a Tyrannical scene because we get trucked by basically just mobs in the dungeon like big trash bulls. So I think it's really important in Fortified to play the tankiest spec you can play. But Tyrannical doesn't seem too bad, and I feel like the frequency at which you get like big stunning hits by bosses is a lot lower, so you can really time out your Word of Glories and defenses a lot easier. Let's talk about bursting. It's really not too bad. They nerfed the hell out of it from last X pack for tanks, whereas the percentage now it's a flat damage. It still does a lot of damage, but you can basically just one Word of Glory or pretty much save your healer from having to heal you at all. Storming is a newer one. That one can be pretty frustrating, and the reason that storming can be difficult, I mean, for one, you're in the melee, but what makes it really difficult is not the damage that storming does, but if you get hit by a storming and then a mechanic happens right after that, like for instance on Zab, if you get hit by a storm and get knocked up, he comes to the middle, does his AoE, and you get caught in that, you could get one shot on Tyrannical. So it's just something that's going to cause a lot of movement. Spiteful, honestly not bad at all. I think Protection Paladins handle it really well. So after you kill a mob, Spite will die after a few seconds. If your DPS has a big enough brain to get out of there, you can literally just consecrate and slow them forever. Now this is probably one of the most important and most impactful ones, I think, is Inspiring. Inspiring is extremely difficult, mainly because you can't interrupt or CC other mobs. Now you can just CC the Inspiring mob, which is pretty good, but a lot of pugs don't have the mindset of doing that. So you're just really left to your own devices, and a lot of times you're gonna have to play and time your defenses extremely well to survive some of those pulls. Necrotic, I remember this week it was Inspiring, Necrotic, Tyrannical, pretty much a dead week. I think I did time of 15 this week, but it was challenging. However, Paladins, I think, are one of the best necrotic tanks. As you know, necrotic reduces the amount of healing done on you for each stack, I think, by 2%. But Kyrian File removes it. That's huge. Also, Bop removes it. Divine Shield removes it. So there you have quite a few tools to get rid of it. Sanguine, pretty self-explanatory. Kite them out of there. Always keep it moving for the most part. Raging Explosive, it's going to be much of the same. Raging, you're not going to want to face tank a Raging mob. Just throw your Consecrate, get the hell out of dodge. Explosive, you do pretty well with Explosive, especially now. I mean, a healer, anybody with any kind of instant cast can one-shot it. As a tank, I try to help out, especially in pugs. Your healer is probably not always going to be able to get every single one of them. I think that covers most all of the different affixes, but let's talk about pride for a few seconds before we wrap this up. So pride really isn't bad for protection paladin because we can pretty much self heal. We have great self sustain. So like I said, once effectively sub 50% if he's got over 10 stacks, which is pretty common, I take to use my holy power to heal myself. And what that does is allow my healer to keep him or herself, I guess, and the rest of the team topped up and not have to worry about me. All right, that's it on the Protection Paladin KSM guide. So if you're wanting to enter the top 5-10%, I'm not sure what it is now at the time of making this video, of all Protection Paladins in the world, be sure to hit me up on stream and ask me any questions you want. Like I said, the link for that will be in the description below. Till next time, guys. Peace!